Before we start, I'm just going to talk about the tools so that you can, the tools I'm using currently. It's an oblique holder for right-handers and a hand 101, and this is Walnut ink. If you're a total beginner, I would recommend two things. The first thing is that you probably want to start with a Nikko G or a Zebra G nib. And the second recommendation is that I would stop this video now and go to my first series called Introduction to Copperplate Calligraphy, which is actually foundation knowledge. Because the series I'm doing currently, I'm just assuming that you have knowledge of the lowercase alphabet and simpler capitals. So let's start slowly. If you need guidelines to work with Copperplate, I'm currently using a landscape guidelines that is 6mm X height, and you can go to my Instagram account and follow the link on my bio, and it will take you to subscribing to my email newsletters. And once you subscribe, you would receive an automated email with a link to a PDF file with several blank guidelines. If you do that and don't find that freebie email, is because the automated email just went into your junk or spam folder. So go and check those folders, because 99% of the times it's always there. Okay, now I'm going to be marking the guidelines like I normally do, and then we'll start talking about Ductus today. So I'm going to be working with the classic ratio for Copperplate calligraphy. So this is my X height, and this is what I call the short ascenders and the long ascenders. And I also have the short descenders and the long descenders. This is the classic ratio, and I call this ratio like 2, 1, 2. So I have 5 units in total. If you want to know more about ratios, you can actually watch part number 2 of this series, where I explain different types of ratios. So for today, the topic that I'm going to be demonstrating is Ductus. And Ductus basically mean the order of the strokes to create a letter form. There are different types of schools of Ductus, and I particularly think there is no right and wrong. It's just depending what you are used to and what you learned. In some letter forms, the difference of Ductus is not going to be obvious. So if I see your work, most of the times I might not know which order of the strokes you did to create a letter form, but in other cases it is going to be obvious. So depending which letter form we are writing, I can see the order of the strokes or not. I want to do a couple of examples. So I'm going to start talking about ovals. I'm going to go a little bit closer now to the page, and I'm going to go lighter. Okay. And I'm going to create a couple of ovals with different types of Ductus to do a demonstration. So I'm going to be using 2 units now, just for the sake of the demonstration, and talk about different types of Ductus. So when we create oval shapes or ellipse, depending on the school that you're following, you might start your oval shapes at 12 o'clock, or I personally start around 2 o'clock. I'm sure there are many ways. I'm sure there are more ways to create ovals, but I think these 2 probably are the most common ones. That means that, let's do that now. If I create letter O and I start at 12 o'clock, that means I'm starting at the top of the X height, which is at the moment 2 units. And I'm going thin and slightly applying pressure and reducing pressure, and then slowly going up and closing my oval shape. And I need to be careful so that this joint is as invisible as possible. And then from here, I'm going to the side and applying pressure from the inside of the O to create the eyelet and opening the arm to be holding hands to the next letter form. Okay, in this case, I needed 2 movements to create this letter, 1 from the 12 o'clock and 2 from the inside of the O to create the eyelet. Okay, I'm gonna call this this order Ductus number 1. And as you see, I need 2 movements in here to create letter O. I'm gonna go a little bit closer now. Okay. Now, the second letter O I'm going to start at 2 o'clock. So a little bit below the top of the X height. And then I'm gonna go up thin and around and slightly applying pressure and releasing pressure and going back up and closing the oval shape. Apply pressure to create the eyelet and opening my arm to be holding hands to the next letter form. Okay, so in this case, I only needed 1 continuous movement to create letter O, only 1. So I'm gonna call that Ductus number 2. So you can see that it's not obvious, as in you cannot tell which ductus I use because the shapes look the same. So it doesn't matter for the viewer because you cannot see any difference in terms of shapes. In this case, it's closer to cursive writing because it's using 1 continuous movement. Now, there are some cases where the ductus will actually impact the letter form. So let's do one example of that. If we are looking at letter E and we follow the same ductus as I'm doing in here, I'm starting with the first one. So I'm following ductus number 1 and I start at 12 o'clock and then apply pressure, release pressure, going around and exit. And then from 12 o'clock, I'm going back down, apply pressure and close letter E. So you see that there is a change in shape because the nature of the direction that I did. So I'm going down, meaning it turns into a thicker downstroke. And from here, I'm going down again into the second one. Because both of them are downstroke, both of them become thicker downstrokes. Now, if I do letter E following ductus number 2, that means that the movement is going to be close to a cursive movement, a continuous movement. So I'm starting from the top and then I keep going up and around, apply pressure, release pressure and exit. Okay, so in here, the shape is different because the nature of the movement is different. In this case, the whole letter started going up and done in 1 single movement. And because this movement is upwards, it gets thin. So you see that it does impact the direction of the movement. Now, let's do another example to see letter A, for example. So if we are creating a ligature between letter I and letter A, and let's see the 2 different types of ductus. So first one, let's start with letter I. And down. Stop in the middle. Now, I'm starting at 12 o'clock. I'm going down, holding hands, going up, going around, and closing the oval. And I need to make sure that the joint is as invisible as possible. And from here, what I would do is I go to the tangent, so to the extreme area of this oval. And from here, I'm going up thin, flat top, and following the 55 degrees slant. exit, and the dot or the title of the eye. Okay, so in this case, again, I started at 12 o'clock and I did the oval shape in this direction. And then from here, I went down and second movement, 1 and 2. Ductus number 1. If I create this pair of letter forms following the second order, I'm going up, flat top and down, up in the middle, stop, and then at 2 o'clock, around, holding hands, going up, flat top and down, exit. If it's open, I make sure that I close the oval, okay? Now with this shape, I started at 2 o'clock and I went up. And in one continuous movement, I created the letter form, Ductus number 2, okay? So again, it is not obvious and you cannot tell. Let's apply. Okay. It doesn't show any difference in the shapes, the direction of the movements. So in some cases is obvious, in other cases it's not possible to know unless there is something very obvious that I can see to understand which is the order. Now let's do more examples. So if we take the example of letter E and we create a letter form, so for example, the word element, I'm going to show you the difference of the movements we're creating this word. So starting with letter E, 12 o'clock and down. Okay, all continuous. Now I will come in here because I'm using this type of ductus and I will close letter E in all the instances and then the crossbar. So in this case, it's gonna show because I'm going to apply a little bit of weight in all these sections in here. The same will happen with words that have ascenders and if we want to create variations on the ascenders. So let's have a look at an example that I talked about in the section where I explain about ligatures, which is part 1 of this series. I'm going to write the word hint. So if I'm writing the word hint following the ductus of a continuous movement, so letter H, I, N, and T. And now I have the crossbar and the dot. Okay, so this letter H is created from the bottom up in a continuous movement all the way around. Now, the more we introduce swashes, which are extensions of a letter form, the more we might want to become flexible at ductus. So in this case, it's all a continuous movement. But if I want to create a couple of variations of this loop, which have a lot more rhythm and movement, I want to break these ductus into 2 parts. So let's do it again. So what I'm doing at the moment, I call that an X-ray, which is literally just looking at the structure of the word without thinking of thin and thins yet. So this time I don't start from the bottom from the baseline. I start from the top. I don't go all the way to the top, roughly in the middle of the long ascenders, and then I'm going down 55 degrees down, and letter H up, and the rest. Now I need to lift the pen, and then option number 1, for example, is this H. Now from this starting point, I'm going up and creating a much bigger loop. And from here, I can go up and down and finish this letter form. On ligatures section of this short series, you can see how I talk about creating a ligature. In here, I'm just gonna keep it simple. And now what is happening here, I need to decide where I'm going to be placing the dot of the eye. And in my opinion, this writing is really narrow and tall, so I tend not to place the dot really close to the letter forms. In this case, maybe I will place the dot up here, just because I would like to divide this space in half. That's why it's very good to work with pencil when you start to add swashes and flourishes into your writing, especially if you are doing a title or a lockup, so that you want to study the shapes and the space that you have. Okay, so in here, that's an option. So that means that the first part of the H goes down and the second part goes up this way. So as you know, this is the same as we have done in other areas. So I'm gonna call that Ductus number 1. Okay, other variations of this letter H. I repeat again the structure of this letter form, going down as an X-ray, and up, and again. Working with a ballpoint pen or a pencil is very beneficial, because also we need to be acquiring visual literacy in terms of widths and spacing. So by studying the structure or the bones of this writing, we need to start to get better at spacing and consistency in terms of the shapes. So I find it very beneficial, and you can use paper and pencil, or you can use the iPad, whatever is good for you, but working only on monoline, it can be very, very beneficial. So, okay, variation number 2. So in this case, I can again go from here and go down, open the oval, cross the stem, open again, and in. What is going to happen again with the dot of or title of the eye? Okay, I don't want to go too close to this oval shape, so all this loop, so it's going to be placed in here, and I can decide to do a straight movement or a wavy crossbar. Okay, again, in this case, we have Ductus number 1, where we have 2 directions, downwards first, and then up and down for the second part. Okay, so 1, and in here, that's number 2. Okay, now let's do this with the pointed pen. So let's create the first variation. And here I haven't put it up, but this obviously is number 2. Okay, let's create this with a ballpoint pen. So I'm going to use now the thin and thicks and take care of the word and the movements. So starting very thin and down. I'm going to recreate this example that I have in here. Okay, letter H, letter I, letter T. Cool. Now I'm going to go back to the initial point, but I'm not going to start right at the starting point. I'm going to start a little bit inside the letter form. So trying to create something that is a little bit, trying to create an invisible elongated shape. I'm going down, crossing, and from here back in and cut. Because I'm going down, I can apply a little bit of pressure in here if I want to. I don't want to apply as much pressure as the stem. So it gets thicker, but not as thick as the main down parts of the letter form. And here I have the dot. And in here, I might want to apply a curvy movement, for example, for the thing. Okay, so you see how the movement went and how I broke down this letter form. And I try to be as invisible as possible. Okay, last one is I'm going to recreate the shape. I will do it just here so that you have the example to see at the top. Let me move the page. Okay, number 2 is this H. So start more or less in the center of the long ascender unit and going down. And from here, letter H. And again, I'm starting inside and extending the movement, going down, loop. There are many ways to do that. This is one, depending which, what is the word that you are writing, okay? Again, you will see that it's thicker because it's a downstroke movement, but I tend to go thinner than the main part of the letter form. So again, 1 and 2. Ductus, number 1. Excellent. Okay, so you have a couple of versions of Ductus to choose from, depending what the school are you coming from. Most of the times, it might not be obvious, like in these cases where you cannot see the differences. It's only depending on how you create the letter forms, okay? If we are doing something like the word nut, it's not gonna be any difference. If we are writing something like coconut, it's also not gonna be any difference. So I hope this was helpful and it will help you to get started into applying swashes and flourishes into your letter forms and consider the order of the strokes. If you have any questions, let me know, or if you have any comments and topics you want me to cover, just let me know and I will take them into consideration. So thank you so much. Bye.